Hello, everyone. This is Bean Boulder. I am Rustin Hamilton with Bronwyn Weaver. Bronwyn, how are you today?
I am great.
Good. That is short and sweet, but believable. So I'm great too. It's early fall. We're not in fall yet, but it is just at least in Kansas City, it is just one of those days. It's actually in the upper 70s probably, but it feels like the beginning of fall in the best possible ways. The air is dry. Everything is just a little bit more crisp. How is
hmm
it in your neck of the woods?
Oh, the same. It's really just beautiful. And near us, gosh, I saw something yesterday. It just really, I want to walk right out into it and talk about it today. Is the majesty of seeing a bald eagle fly. And I don't know if you have them, if you are in a position to see them pretty regularly within, oh gosh, like 7 miles from where our farm is, there is a lake that's part of, um, it's in this watershed that we've got several lakes that are homes to bald eagles. And when I was a girl, it was a really big deal to see bald eagles. In the 1960s, the use of DDT along the Great Lakes really reduced the bald eagle population. And by the time I was in college, restoration efforts had begun, at least along the Great Lakes. And I went to school in Cleveland. And at the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, they had, uh, it was probably one among many, but they were artificially inseminating bald eagles. And then they would take healthy bald eagle eggs and put them in nests because that was the result. That's what happened with the use of DDT as a pesticide. The result was that it would just be pervasive. It would get into the food chain, and the result within the eagles would be that they would produce shells of their eggs that were fragile. So they couldn't withstand the just the normal being in a nest and reaching to maturity until they produced a chick. So as a result, the bald eagle population was really disseminated. In fact, that's why when you open up the first issue of Boulder magazine, we are so everything in the magazine is really part of I don't know, it's our passion, our mission to be able to show our impact on the environment, our impact um, in terms of the natural resources we need, our responsibility to use them wisely, and the kind of impact that we can have in the long term. So it was really appropriate when we thought about when you open up the very first issue of the magazine, what are we going to talk about that really represents, I don't know, the journey we want you to have with the magazine, maybe. And so we entitled it Baldacious because we were making kind of a play on on the word. We kind of made up a word, and we wanted to uh, start. The very first thing we wrote about was a conservation success. Now we're in the media around us. Seems like everybody wants to sensationalize or amplify failures or stories of scarcity or stories where you feel pretty helpless about what kind of an impact you can have. But the bald eagle story, the one I'm so excited about, I just like launched into this thing with hardly even saying hello to you, Rustin. But anyway, I got so excited. I wanted to launch into this. Let me read to you what we wrote. According to the American Eagle Association, at the lowest recorded point in 1963, that's 60 years ago, there were only 417 nesting pairs of bald eagles in the lower 48 states. I mean, That blows you away, 417. By 2007, the number had grown to 10,000, prompting the bald eagle's removal from the endangered species list. Estimates for the current number of bald eagle nesting pairs in the lower 48 states are now at 71,400.
It's amazing.
It is. What
That's
a
this
success.
probably the biggest success that, um, the conservation department, whoever is in control of this has had, right? There's been a few others. Buffalo would be one of them, but that's a little bit more of a controlled thing, even more so. But the bald eagle is easily probably the biggest success that they have had. And if you consider 417, the number was small enough that they probably knew where every single one of
Pair
those
was
eagles, yeah,
absolutely.
right.
Yeah.
And to get up to 71,000. I mean, even the difference between 2007 and now, you know, obviously, it's exponential, the kind of
It
growth rate that
is.
they would have. Yeah.
And I think that, at first it came from, and I think this journey is important to note because it's very empowering that we can identify a problem. And if we're on it, we can make a change very quickly for the better. And so I think to be aware of the fact that when the bald eagle was impacted, and it got impacted so severely by the use of this specific pesticide, DDT. So DDT stopped being used, but it took a long time to get out of the soils. And so the bald eagle needed some help and support to get through that period. And programs like the one that I referred to at the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, I actually, when I was in college, I wrote an article about their conservation efforts. And I met the person at the museum who was handling the bald eagles. They had a couple of bald eagles that had imprinted on this man so that he could they when even to know what that description means, when a bird is imprinted on another person, like a falcon or any of the birds of prey, this means that they have a bond of trust, and it is a dependable bond between the two of them. And so and a bald eagle, a mature bald eagle, has a wingspan that's more than 6 feet across. So again, you can just like hardly imagine the magnificence of these birds. And to see, and I can remember uh, he was the man who was the handler was tall and slim, very slow in his movements, very calm and kind of a peaceful presence. And he was able to handle these magnificent birds. And then when eggs were produced, they would take those eggs and replace they would just what you said before about when these numbers were so low, every nest was being monitored. Every pair of bald eagles was being watched and being monitored. So observers knew when that was egg laying time for the bald eagles, and they would have scaffolding in place and replace these eggs so that the bald eagles could raise a healthy nestful of the next generation
So they
and
would take
turn it
eggs.
around.
They would take. Where do they get the healthy eggs at? Is that what they
They did the
produce
Yeah,
themselves?
they had female bald eagles at the museum,
Okay.
and they would do artificial insemination so that they were those females were laying fertilized eggs,
Yep.
and then they would be viable. And
In a
um,
controlled environment, take the
yeah,
controlled eggs, put
hmm
them out in the habitat. I wonder if they were able to take the fragile eggs that they replaced and do anything with them. Do you know? I mean, would they even survive being
I don't
moved
know.
like
If
back in the,
Yeah,
back in the controlled environment?
I don't know very much about it. I would imagine that if the DDT was being absorbed into the bald eagles enough to have an impact on the shell, that probably it would be impacting the health of the bird overall. And, it's interesting, there was another, not for this podcast to turn into a diatribe against DDT. It, after all, was, created, invented because the focus was on, um, increasing crop production and growing food, and so, I really get, um, prickly when people talk about mistakes in the past, um, as if they were done on purpose by some evil thinker who wanted to spread poison. That's not the case. It was one of those things where DDT was seen as this great tool to get rid of mosquitoes, to get rid of pests, but its use, um, after it had become pretty prevalent, then they realized that it had negative impacts and that it was, then it was a banned substance and, it evolved to become a better and better, but
Yeah, and weren't they trying to get rid of wasn't malaria still,
oh,
at
yeah.
least in our country at the time? So,
Yeah.
I don't know how prevalent it was, but I mean, that was part of the reason was they were taking extreme measures to try to get rid of malaria. And they were spraying this stuff just up and down the streets, and you can
Oh,
see
yeah.
footage of this, yeah, back in the 40s and 50s.
Yeah, spraying it out of airplanes, the whole bit, and you can imagine that in areas that would be swampy or near water, near lakes, near rivers, that's the habitat for, birds like the bald eagle. So at any rate, when DDT was identified as a real problem, it was banned. Um, it was 10, 20 years after its use that it was still found in soils. In fact, here's another story about DDT and its long-term impact on, on our ecosystem, is that when I first started to really get into keeping bees, so in 2006, 2007, 2008, I was, keeping bees in Illinois. I started to have a lot of hives. About that time, I'd have maybe 100, hives. And it was right at the, um, maybe not at the apex, but at that point in time, colony collapse, trying to figure out what was happening to the honeybee population became a really big issue. And at the University of Pennsylvania, they started to approach the problem from lots of different angles. One angle was looking at the honeycomb wax in a hive. So, most beekeepers, if you keep honeybees, the wax that the bees fill up with honey, you every August, you put it in a honey extractor, extract the honey, and then you put that same frame of beeswax back in the hive for the bees to fill it up again the next year. So you're kind of reusing the wax over and over again. So the University of Pennsylvania started to test the wax that was in the hive to look at it more intensely to see if that could be contributing to why honeybees were having such a hard time. I think it was like 35 years after DDT was used, it was still found in the wax in a beehive because it just stayed in the soil and then would be in the hive. And so over time, it would accumulate. So that's one of the things that they've, as part of determining how to keep honeybees healthier, that old wax actually was pretty toxic for the bees and was making their immune systems vulnerable. So DDT was a really nasty thing, but
Well, that's a fascinating story. In our last episode, we talked about, well, I mentioned that I'd been up in Montana not
Mhm.
Montana, Wyoming, I'm sorry, Grand Teton National Forest, and we were rafting on, the Snake River and had the opportunity to see several bald eagles there, which was
Wow, that must have
amazing.
been beautiful.
But what's really cool, though, is that here in Kansas City, I can also see them on the Missouri River, which around here, I mean, we're in the Midwest, so that probably wasn't the case, 30, 40 years ago. But
Yeah,
you can go
no.
down, you can go, within 8 or 10 miles of here, and you'll, certain times of the year, you will see bald eagles flying over the river. And that's pretty amazing because I guarantee you, I'm pretty sure that when there were only 417 of them, none of those were
Yeah.
here. Okay. So it just shows you how they've, how they're in more places than they used to be, and that's pretty cool.
Well, yeah, I love that story. I love the fact that, it's a part of that, journey that we're on. Um, those of us that love being outdoors, that, have careers built around being outside and observing, um, our natural world, and, the idea that we could see a problem, collectively appreciate it, the fact that it was on the endangered species list, the fact that there was attention given to this problem, that really smart people put their heads together to figure out what is going to be I'm sure, several approaches to managing, the environment, the protection, the care, the resources, that were needed to bring back the population, and the fact that now it's a success story. It should encourage us all that we can be a part of fixing problems instead of just wringing our hands about the problems. And the honeybees, it was a similar kind of journey. 20 years ago, as colony collapsed and people became more and more aware of um, the kind of the not endangered status of the honeybee, but the fact that honeybees were in trouble, people put their heads together and started to encourage people to keep bees again and to appreciate honey and where it comes from so that there could be a market for people. I'm sure in your community, I'm sure in the most surprising places, people are keeping honeybees and selling the honey. And that was a big part of revitalizing uh, a hobby and for a lot of people, viable business that then helped the population, help the honeybees.
Well, I don't know, do you still have your honeybees?
I do, that's kind of an interesting tangent.
Yeah, maybe another story.
Another story. I don't have honeybees like I used to. I used to teach beekeeping classes, and I live in an area here in Ohio where we have um, a natural population of honeybees. Honeybees aren't native to North America. They came across on the Mayflower and in the settlers from Europe. They are most of the honeybees that are kept here are Italian honeybees. And they're not, yeah, the pollinators that are native to North America are like the bumblebee or the little sweat bee, but they're bees and they're pollinators. They're fuzzy on the outside. Wasps are not fuzzy, wasps, yellow
There's
jackets
nothing fuzzy
are
about
shiny.
wasp, nothing
No, no.
nothing warm, nothing cuddly, nothing
Right,
anything.
we'll have for another episode, we'll kinda get into bees more, but
I'll bring my
the
EpiPen just in case.
yeah, the native pollinators just don't make a lot of honey,
Yeah.
and so the bees in Europe produce a lot of honey, and that's why they were brought over because um, they you can actually harvest the honey, but they're not native. They don't Our native pollinators in North America hibernate, and the European honeybees that we have that produce honey, They don't hibernate, and they have to stay alive all winter long, which is why they are more challenges.
Well, that's interesting. I learned a little bit. I did not know that we did not that honeybees were not, a part of North America originally.
Mhm.
So that's okay. Well, we'll get into bees another time,
We'll get into bees
and we'll
another time.
talk about your cinnamon honey at some point,
Oh,
which was
yeah.
amazing. That was yeah, that's so good. I can taste it right now. All right. Okay. Interesting discussion. Again, well, I tell you what, why don't you tell them where to get a hold of Boulder Magazine?
Absolutely, and thank you, everybody, for letting us just launch into this. It is, the what we were talking about today is the very first words that we wrote in the magazine, and you can see where the passion comes from behind it. It was very intentional, and it meant a lot to us to be able to lead with the bald eagles, to lead with what is optimistic and hopeful and helpful about where things come from and why it matters. That's why we started Boulder Magazine. We hope that if you're listening to this podcast, you'll help us spread the word. It's our intent with this podcast to talk not only about the subjects in the magazine, but to talk about what it's like to produce a magazine, something in print and created to help spread the optimism and the hope for managing our natural resources and being good stewards of the earth. Go to bouldermagazine.com to learn more about how you can subscribe. We would love to hear from you. You can email us at info@bouldermagazine.com. We'd love for you to be a part of our story too. So,
Awesome. All
yeah,
right. Thank you, Bronwyn. Great
you betcha.
information. Everyone, just continue to watch out for us. We love it when people respond and when they listen and watch us if they're able to do that. So we encourage you to be bolder and have a great day.
Take care, everybody. Be bolder.